Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Atamanova and I'm happy to see you here in Ukraine Media Center, Ukraine Forum today. So today we've invited you to talk on an interesting topic, to talk about energy infrastructure during war, to talk about the fuel sector and our readiness to the new heating season. I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Oleksandr Kharchenko, Director at the Energy Industry Research Center, Hryhorii Plachkov, Head of the State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation in years 2017-2021, it's Serhii Kuiun, Director of A95 Consulting Group, and Yuriy Boyko, Advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear friends. Today there was a statement by our intelligence department that the tactics of their missile terror failed. We know that our country went through dozens of missile attacks. We know that our energy infrastructure was severely damaged. But let's talk about the challenges and opportunities for our energy sector. Mr. Yuriy, let's start probably with you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for invitation, for the opportunity to take part in this event. Regarding the issue, it's extremely complicated, really, because if we need to research any issue in details, there is a number of complicated nuances and factors always. And talking about the result as the available power in all the regions of our country, we may state that energy technicians won their small fight in the energy front, their fight against aggressor, and thanks to the heroic work, believe me, it's true, because I have numerous facts on how, under what conditions the process of reconstruction was going on for those destroyed infrastructure facilities. That's true. So the technicians, with their heroic work, they were mitigating the consequences, re-establishing the power supply to all the consumers in Ukraine. What factor is worth keeping in mind during today's discussion? I think we will touch that matter, is the reduction of reliability of energy infrastructure as the consequence of those missile strikes, because one thing is supplying the electric power to the regions which were mostly affected by those missile strikes, but yet another thing is do it in fast and reliable manner, or doing it in fast and reliable manner right away. So I agree with my colleagues from the intelligence department. I have this optimism, but I clearly realized where we are and whom we deal with and what are the tasks to set in front of us to promptly re-establish the power supply within the next season of years 2023-2024. Mr. Oleksandr, let's talk about the opportunities. We all understand the consequences inflicted on our country by the occupiers, the consequences for the energy infrastructure. You were telling us about that, but about the opportunities, are there any opportunities that have opened for us this year? Well, it's a scientific fact that there are opportunities. The question is how to use them. We are the champion of failed opportunities. So let's try putting it this way. I will start with what Mr. Yuriy said in the end. We have to think about the next season now. In my opinion, if we compare the level of reliability of our energy infrastructure when we were entering this missile attack season, it's now 50%, and the resilience reserve is not that big. And to get prepared to the next season, we need some fantastic effort, and one of such efforts is the reconstruction of aerial networks and how to deliver the necessary high voltage equipment within the period that we have until the next heating season. And it's very complicated task. And another big mission is in development and implementation again before the beginning of the next season. The system of reserve supply for the infrastructure of big cities, water supply systems, heating systems should be secured from missile attacks, from isolation of the any regional blackouts. And this is something we have to work on, so that in any situation we know that people don't end up without water and heat supply, because it's very, very difficult to survive in a big city without water and heat, and we cannot forecast what will be the attacks next season. And obviously no one said that it's over. We will have probably more attacks. So within this short term, those are the main focuses for us. And the reconstruction of generation capacities is equally important. We're just lucky to have this early flooding this year, but the flooding will be over shortly. For the time being, the hydraulic power plants, they generate a lot of energy, but other capacities that we have, they need additional repair. It seems to work, but it works more thanks to a miracle rather than to stability. And we need to procure new capacities that should be reinstalled, and they would compensate the capacities that are lost for forever now. So it's a huge task, it's immensely complicated, and under the conditions of limited financial resource it becomes yet more complicated. And unfortunately in the energy market the situation is quite sad. So it won't be easy for us. We have a lot of opportunities, but we have to work very diligently with them. Mr. Hryhorii, the question is to you, talking about the reconstruction of generation capacities. What should we do in this regard? Well, first of all, in my opinion, the ministry and other central bodies of executive power are not preparing for the winter for the first time, so I think that the plan of action should have been developed before, and within a certain period the energy companies should get prepared until the next autumn and winter season. It's the acquisition of coal, acquisition of gas, and reconstruction of the energy equipment. We are lucky that the Russian forces did not launch attacks against nuclear power plants, so nuclear power plants, they remain the backbone for our energy infrastructure, but they should be re-outfitted until the next winter period, because they are the main company and the main generator of the electric power. Many capacities have remained in the occupied territories. Let's not forget about Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant and Kakhovka hydraulic power plant. And I think that we should be prepared to the summer peak as well, because in the energy sector of Ukraine it's been 10 years that there is a tendency to have two peaks. One peak is in winter when we have to heat everything, and in summer everybody switches the air conditioners on, and there is another peak of consumption. So everybody should not forget that there is a war going on in the country, and we need to save all the energy resources, both primary and secondary. So both individuals and businesses should save. So this saving regime should keep working not only during winter, but during fall and summer and spring too. Because we really have a lot of problems in energy sector. Mr. Hryhorii, you just opened another layer of problems that I would like to talk about. It's oil, gas, coal. Where are we going to get all of that? Who is ready to answer that, dear experts? Well, I think that with the nuclear fuel, the issue is more or less solved, but regarding the gas and coal, we have to ask someone else. Well, first of all, let me say a couple of words about the general principles of preparation for any fall and winter season. As previous speakers correctly mentioned, it's not the first and not the second winter when we face the need to get prepared to. Today, this preparation will be complemented by the nuances related to the war with Russia, but the standard approach to such preparation to the winter consumption peaks is in clear understanding of organizational measures and technical measures. The technical measures usually comprise repair of all the equipment which is subject to scheduled maintenance. It's the completion of the investment programs by the operators of distribution system like Ukrenergo, and this year obviously the standard block will be added by the reconstruction of the infrastructure that was affected by the missile strikes. And I want to say that within the framework of those events there is a clear realization that we should do not strategically right thing but operationally right thing, like building new generating capacities within the short period of time with an emphasis on the green energy is impossible. So to go through the next winter we have to count on all the equipment which may theoretically be rebuilt within the next 6 to 7 months. Also, the technical measures which will be new this season will be the attempts to build the generating capacities which may be deployed promptly and which may be in compliance with the program of decentralized generation. I'm talking first of all about gas turbine facilities which may be quickly connected to the systems and to have them generate the electric power promptly, and the biogas installations with localization for the types of fuel available locally. And in the same way, there is a discussion for an umpteenth month that the local authorities are being ordered to implement the local programs for decentralized generation. Honestly, today there is that deficit for proposal on part of Ukraine on what to build and where to build in response to the request from our international partners when they ask what is about to be built and where will it build, are there any projects ready. So this dialogue is actually on the way. As to the organizational steps to solve the issue of this preparation to the winter season, my colleagues already mentioned it. So we should word it in a couple of simple words. The finance and economic measures for balancing the energy market. The phrase is not complicated, and some might hardly argue with it. So it contains the need for the solution of a number of a very sometimes old problems, and sometimes the situation that emerged as a result of an armed aggression. So I can name like 5 or 6 problems, so you have clear understanding of what is it all about. We have to understand that the systemic operators, the network operators, they require economically balanced tariffs. So I'll tell you about this system operator and the distribution operators. So in this connection, when we talk about the economically balanced tariffs, we have to clearly realize that we talk about the fact that the denominator reduced, the consumption and generation reduced like 30% maybe, and we come to unpleasant conclusion that the tariffs should be brought in compliance with the new reality, and it deformed the economy of those enterprises during the mass missile strikes and respectively reduction of consumption in regions. Starting from September, we don't have opportunity to sign primary documents between the guaranteed buyer and Ukrenergo due to the resolution of the court, which cancelled the formula of part on the balance, which is subject to reimbursement to the generators of alternative power. There is on one hand a law that says that the generators of the alternative power have to pay for the balances that they create, but there is no legislation which would allow doing it. A small consequence of that is that since September they cannot sign the guaranteed buyer, and Ukrenergo cannot sign primary documents, and it results in a loss of about 4 billion hryvnias per month. And we probably should recognize that the financial formula existing in the energy market requires modernization, because Ukrenergo cannot comply with that role, which creates a chain of debts in the market. Energoatom underpays the generator, and guaranteed buyer cannot finance it to the full extent to the suppliers of universal services at the existing tariffs. And again, it results in impossibility for the latest one to pay their debts in full, and those debts are accumulated, and they are of cumulative nature. Among the key organizational steps, we have to also mention the need in modernization of the trade strategy of the guaranteed buyer. And by my personal evaluation, it may result in additional proceeds of about 6 billion hryvnias to the guaranteed buyer. So I'm only covering the top layer, which results in a figure with 9 zeros. So Mr. Yuriy, when you talk about tariffs, you mean that the energy carriers will become more expensive. Well, whether they will become more expensive or not, we will find it out from the resolution of the government, but the existing model, and for one of the factors of which is the tariff for the population, this formula expires this September, and I think that this week we are about to see the resolution of the government about either the extension of this model for a certain period or amendment to it. Mr. Oleksandr, what's your opinion on the energy resources Well, about the energy carriers, like Mr. Hryhorii mentioned correctly, we're not about to witness any problems within the next year or two, well, maybe 1 year, but we have the unique situation with the gas. In year 2022, we unexpectedly ended up in a situation when Ukraine almost covered its needs of gas. We generated more than 18 million cubic meters, and we consumed less than 20. Should we done it back in 21, we would have covered our needs in gas. So again, if there is a miracle once again, and our gas mining grows, somehow we will be close to covering our own consumption. I don't think it's about to happen, but the need for export is quite low, and it simplifies the situation a lot. As to the coal, it's a very complicated domain, but private mines will cover our need for coal, and I think we won't need to import coal, because under healthy conditions we should have exported it to Europe, but in view of how the events would develop, I think that's not about to happen. So with the main energy carriers, it's not so well, but not catastrophically bad. But under conditions of absence of funds, I was listening to Mr. Yuriy, I think we could put it in a couple of words: there is no money and there will be none, if anything doesn't change dramatically. So to accumulate either gas or coal, we need money, but we don't understand where it's about to come from. So it's a huge problem that the government is facing now, and we should expect them to solve them, because there's no other way to make around this situation. And regarding other parts like fuel market, let's ask Mr. Serhii. Yeah, Mr. Serhii. Yeah, really, I already started falling asleep here while my colleagues are talking here. Well, my impression is that, well, first of all, I'm impressed with what the energy technicians have done. Like, I'm a kind of person who is happy waking up in the morning, and I can switch on the light, I can switch on my kettle, the tram emerged in the street. I hardly stopped, because I haven't seen the tram within 3 or 4 months in the street. It's very cool, and it says once again that we may solve some unreal tasks, really. It's a very fresh example, but for our fuel sector, which solved this issue of provision with fuel, we got rid of 100% of pre-war sources of supply. That's normal already, that gas is available in the pump stations, everything keeps operating, but it was really extremely difficult task which was solved. And from what I see, from what my colleagues are saying, in our sectors the situation is way better. First of all, there are no static objects or like static facilities like power generating plant, aerial line. The war forced us to become mobile. In fact, there is no storage of fuel in big fuel silos now. The fuel is in automobiles, in tanks. It keeps moving all the time. And besides, we were helped by certain peculiarities. There are no debts in our sector. Everything is quite simple. Here's the money, here's the goods. And now I'm feeling, imagine, I remember I was torn apart before the war. The fuel got more 50 kopecks more expensive, or 1 hryvnia more expensive per liter. Last year we got we got the price grown twice, and people are happy just to have it. So the higher is the tariff in any energy sector, the less problems we have. All the politicians are afraid, they were afraid to restrict the fuel import from Russia or Belarus because it will entail the growth of import tariffs. They were afraid to have it at the price of 1 hryvnia more expensive, so that's the root of evil. About the prospects, what are the problems? We have the fuel, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have no problems. We continue buying, first of all, at very high price. Everybody understands our dependency. We generate a lot of demand and we pay a lot of premiums to the European suppliers, respectively. We overpaid about $100 per ton, and it's about 10% of the price. And that's the speculative component that we had to pay due to the dependency, due to the situation we ended up in. What should we do about it? We are seeing now that in March there was a situation when this speculative component almost disappeared. Why? Because we procured more reserves than we had before the war. The balance as of January, February is bigger than the pre-war period reserves, and that pushed the demand down. The markets calmed down and this speculative component disappeared right away. The market switched from short to long. When us as a buyer, we already dictate the prices. We can pick, okay, we can buy from you because your price is lower, and not the other way around. When the seller dictates their conditions, it means that we have to keep our level of reserves in the market. We still have to diversify it, and we have to create provisions. Now there is already the draft law on creation of the minimal reserves of oil and oil products. Well, this initiative is very necessary. I'm not even saying about the strategic role of it, of the reserve. It should exist, and that reserve, which was not the state reserve but private reserve, saved us from even worse scenario with the fuel. So in fact, March and April we spent it on those reserves, regardless the bombardment of oil processing factories. And now the government wants to make it an obligation on the side of the traders to have this reserve, and we have to think about how to rebuild the internal manufacturing. It will reduce our dependency on import, and again it would entail creating of more jobs and so on and so forth. It's difficult to talk about this due to the security situation, but we have to think about it in the context of improving the security for those facilities, as we will have new air defense systems coming our way. Probably we may be able to emphasize the security of strategic enterprises, strategic businesses, because I was asked where to build a new mobile oil processing factory. I told them build in Kyiv region because the Kyiv region is most secure. So these are the two challenges, the provisions and the prices. This is something we will have to work on, but for the operational supply there is already good system built. I think that it cannot be practically stopped. Well, we understand that it's difficult to plan ahead 1 year ahead, but within the next half a year, do you expect the price for fuel to be stable? Well, we see the destruction of Russian narratives for the time being, that those sanctions, food sanctions, will create deficit, everybody will freeze. What we're having now is the Europe flooded with fuel, Ukraine flooded with fuel, and we have reduction of price. For example, today there was another fall of price down to 70% per barrel for Brent. A year ago it was 140 on the peak, and within a year it was about 100 to 120. So in fact there is a lot of skepsis. The sanctions don't work, they are imperfect, but this is what we have in fact. The prices are falling, the fuel is abundant. Even now the Russian oil tries to find weak links in that system where to get sold. They're looking for the countries. Well, now we're having a problem with Turkey. They're the biggest importer of Russian oil, and now the supply of some fuel from Turkey grows, coming our way. Turkish, they have their processing, their manufacturing, so we have to sort it out, and it's yet another challenge for us. And I'm seeing that in principle the dynamics we're observing today, it will persist most likely, and this price is satisfactory for everybody, both the consumers and mining companies, but for Russians it's the catastrophe. I think if price goes a little bit lower, it will mean that for the half of Russian mining sites, it will be a loss. For Russia to have oil delivered from the West Siberia to the Black Sea ports or Baltic ports, it adds another $20–25 per ton. So if we count net back for the drill, for the well, the mining will be lossy. So it works really, and I hope this is how it will be for the next observable period. Everybody needs low prices, both Europeans and Americans. We remember, like Biden stated in his address, that American families suffer from the high prices on fuel. So I hope that it will help preserve these prices further on. I want to offer our journalists, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Yes, I have any questions to Mr. Serhii. Ukrinform, how serious is the threat of re-establishment of Ukrainian dependency on Russian energy carriers, and what can government do to prevent it? Well, there is no global threat. I don't think that it exists globally for us. Specifically when we talk about diesel fuel, it's under sanctions in Europe. And I have to say that it's not even the market which works perfectly for the prevention of this import, but it's the financial system. Every bank has analysts who track every shipment of fuel, where it comes from. And as soon as there are any suspicious ports, tankers in that chain, that agreement will not be financed. And it means that this fuel will not be coming here. So we still have questions about Turkey, but we have supplies from Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt. So they're trying to enter our market. Unfortunately, we don't have such a thorough monitoring as European banks do have, but there are already proposals by net sector associations. So if you cannot provide a certificate of origin of a, say, Chamber of Commerce of any country, so that shipment will be either restricted, or there will be a fee or levy imposed that will make supply unprofitable. So this is the way we're moving. The most complicated situation is with liquefied gas. It's not under sanctions in Europe, and this is why we're seeing now that there are some supplies coming from Lithuania, Latvia and Poland of suspicious origin, because the import of this type of fuel is not restricted there. The mechanism there is a little bit more complicated, but I think that if we implement those basic measures like certification of fuel and have our customs study the documents more diligently, I think that would cut at least half of that volume of supplies, and then we will develop some secondary sanctions to block those supplies. We have more questions, please.
Lorenzo Cremonesi from Corriere della Sera from Italy. I have a question to whoever wants to answer. We are at the end of the winter. According with your official, Ukrainian official, the battle for winter energy was more or less won. There was declaration coming from the government, from the prime minister to the president. And if I hear well, also you think that on the whole the Russian strategy didn't work. So I would like to ask you, what was the role of Europe in this, the help of the European allies? Was it useful? Was it important? I understood you had generators coming from different countries from Europe. Can you try to give us, in a sense, a kind of a picture of what was the role of Europe in your fight against the war that Putin launched on the energy sector of your country? Thank you.
I will probably start, if you don't mind. Well, the answer may take a lot of time, because obviously without the European Union we would have been unable to win this fight for our land. First of all is the synchronization with INSOE, which played a major role in the stability of the European energy system. Then is the donor aid, which was provided and which is still provided by almost all the countries of Europe, and not only Europe. And without that aid we would feel it way more difficult. I'm talking about both equipment that was provided by the governments and by private companies, and that they keep providing, and the most part of the procurements that we plan for the repairs, again, we plan to do it with the help of the donors. And at the same time, the moral factor and the humanitarian aspect played its role, because tens of thousands of generators which were sent from Europe to Ukraine, and this feeling of support from Europe, it was very important and we appreciate it. Mr. Yuriy, if I'm not mistaken, the import of electric power from NSOE to our joint system was taking place, so the help was not only in equipment, but as the electric power itself. Any more questions? Nina Iwotska, Interfax Ukraine. My question is probably to Mr. Yuriy. Mr. Oleksandr mentioned that we need this gas turbine, biogas, mobile stations. Are any incentive measures imposed by the government or implemented by the government? And what is the capacity we need for the next heating season for these replacement power generating plants? Okay, let's get back a couple of minutes and let's recall that the successful preparation to the winter requires a number of organization steps. Like simple example here, someone presents you a car and they tell you, like, go to taxi, drive and make your money, make your brand, and you start building a business model for operation of this vehicle. make food for yourself and your family, you omit the amortization and capex, so your business will only work if you cover your operation expenses. We are currently in a very difficult situation in this regard because the electric power tariff does not cover that, is not covered by transport. If we're saying that the installation of gas turbine facilities is in the plans, by the end of the summer they will have come. I think 20-30 units will be arriving. Back then the capacity of such facility is from 25 to 50 megawatts. How much of them do we have to install to pass the winter successfully? There is no answer to this question. We need as much as possible of such things, but any task has its optimum, and considering such facilities as the source of the permanent electric power generation is unfeasible. They should serve as a reserve. We should be able to operate such installation within the economically balanced mode. So getting back to my statement, we need to provide the financially and economically balanced model for the operation of energy market. If one invested hryvnia will generate losses, the acquisition of generation equipment, we've heard recently that a municipality of France handed some solar panels. Solar panels, they are easier in operation than gas turbine installation, but let's not to create conditions. We need to create conditions to cover the economic expenses by the generator. So this will be the main tasks for passing the next winter season. So you're saying we don't even cover the transport expenses, so to up to what amount should we raise the tariff to have those expenses covered, or is it only the political will matter? Well, I envy to my colleague who presented the results of the balance in the fuel market. In fact, it was not a very difficult step. Yeah, we just deregulated the market and the gas somehow appeared there. So in our case, that our consumers are not equal. So just a conditional physical person and individual, if they come, if they buy something in wholesale, they will have a discount. So we have an individual consumer and a legal consumer, like a legal entities, the businesses. If the businesses pay at market prices, more or less market prices, why I'm saying more or less, because there is a lot of regulation which deforms the market price, and household consumers, they pay fixed price, and it's average weighted. If we see how much an average household consumer pays, it's 1.2, 1.3 hryvnias, because there is a tariff 1.68 hryvnias for those who consume more than 250 kilowatts per month, and the lower tariff for those who consume lower. And there are seasonal tariffs that allow consuming electric power twice cheaper, and the average is 130, and the transport is about 1.3, 1.35 hryvnias. And the tariffs of distribution power distribution operators, they are included in this transport price, but they're different across Ukraine. There is more than 1 hryvnia difference. For example, for Kyiv, the transport is cheaper due to the high concentration of consumers, but there are regions where tariff differs more than 1 hryvnia from Kyiv. And when the tariffs don't cover the transport component, it's quite difficult to balance the power consumption tariff. It's a little bit easier with the gas, because ideally there are some preferences and exemptions, a standard mechanism that I already mentioned, but I'm an adherent of market regulation mechanisms. But when we talk about the price of 1 cubic meter of gas, it covers transportation expenses. There is no mine laid in the foundation of this price formation. So is it the political resolution which is an obstacle for us? Yeah, obviously I've already announced, if I haven't, the current model expires in September, and this week we are about to see the decision in this regard, whether the model will be extended or amended. I think for what I know, the discussion is in its final phase, so this is the final week when we will have some resolution. And finally, I will have a question to whoever will want to answer. So we all await for our victory. We trust in it. What will happen to our energy market after the victory? What is it going to look like? Why are you asking me? I don't really know. Well, I can say about my sector. You see, there are serious incentives for change of the structure of the market as it is, and secondly, for the development of our oil mining, oil processing. What was the main problem with the internal manufacturing of the fuel in Ukraine? The problem was that the market depended 80% on supplies from Russia and Belarus, the cheap fuel at dumping prices, which didn't allow our businesses to compete to process the most expensive fuel mined in the sea, and it resulted in absence of investments and normal development. Today, when we got rid of that fuel, we have absolutely different import priorities. We have parity with the Europeans, with the sea supplies, and that will be higher priority, and it will generate profit for the oil processing factories. And I see that those factories like Drogobych, Nadvernansky, maybe Odessa factory that were already thought to be dead, they will have a chance for a second life. It will be a normal situation, and it will entail changes in the oil mining. We will need more internal mining. The government has undertaken an extraordinary step in nationalization of Ukernafta. They financially renew the company. They will be more transparent for the government and for the market. The management will be more transparent, and it creates a very powerful potential, so that after the war we could get rid of our import dependency in many sectors. And I think that the oil mining and oil processing will be reborn in Ukraine. Well, we understand the situation with the fuel market, but what about the energy sector? Well, after the victory we will play fantastic energy of Ukraine, because we have a lot of specialists, we have a lot of project institutions, and the institutions that train the energy technicians. I think we will have new technologies coming, not only in traditional energy, but renewable energy and nuclear energy. We will have to renew about 50% of our energy infrastructure, capacities, area lines, everything, and I'm sure that this whole grid will be modernized. This is how it happens. A major part of energy infrastructure was destroyed, and I think as it will be renewed, it will be on a different level than it is now. Well, and if you allow me, I will add just a couple of words about the market of the electric power. Well, first of all, now we are already implementing the projects for construction of the secure critical infrastructure. Obviously, it's not something that happens within one day, but even by the end of this year, I'm sure we will have had a number of objects, of facilities, the key facilities that will be secured against missile attacks, and that will be one of the parts of new reality in which we will live tomorrow, and this is what will be associated with the sector itself in future. And as to the market, the availability of transparent principles will allow us to raise investments. Well, the investments will find the market by themselves. We will not have to look for them if there will be clear rules for the investor, which will allow returning invested capital. No matter how capitalistically it sounds, the government just needs to form the policy. There is an understanding what should the structure of generation be in year, say, 2033, if we talk about today, this year. So this structure is calculated based on a number of criteria. First of all, the most economically cheap way for the government, so that we ensure the lowest price in the market, and the consumers receive that electric power 365 days a year, regardless of the weather and economic indicators. And this is, in my opinion, where the role of the government should end, to create the policy which would ensure energy security. And again, we will not have to look for the investments. They will find us ourselves, and the number of questions, the number of issues will just disappear. Dear friends, if we have any more questions on the floor, let me know. Well, seems like we don't have any more questions. I would like to thank our speakers today. It's Serhii Kuiun, Oleksandr Kharchenko, Serhii, Yuriy Boyko, and Hryhorii Plachkov, and we continue victory and Ukraine.